What we're witnessing right now across the United States is not just a single winter storm. It's the opening chapter of what could become one of the most relentless and punishing winter patterns we've seen in years. The massive storm that's been hammering the country is still ongoing. But I need to talk to you about what comes next, because the atmosphere is setting up for something extraordinary. We are locked into a pattern that is screaming for large-scale snowstorms. And I'm going to be genuinely surprised if we don't see multiple additional winter systems before the next few weeks are over. I've identified 4 separate opportunities for significant snow events moving forward, and the cold air that's going to be in place is the kind of cold that breaks records and makes headlines. So, let me walk you through exactly what's happening and what you need to be watching for. First, let's talk about the storm that's still impacting millions of people as I record this on Sunday morning. One thing that's become clear based on what we've already observed is that on the western side of the system, snowfall has pushed further south than the models originally anticipated. That's significant because it tells us something about how this storm is behaving compared to expectations. Now, this doesn't automatically guarantee that the eastern side of the storm will also track further south. The storm could take a slightly different angle as it moves northeast. But what it does tell us is that if there's going to be a deviation from the forecast track, the odds favor a more southern solution rather than a northern one. This storm has been incredibly dynamic and has evolved dramatically over the past week, going from a relatively flat west to east track to an extremely diagonal path that's been racing northward as time progresses. By the way, if you'd like specific weather forecasts for your region or city, please leave them in the comments. I'll answer them individually as time allows. Also, if you like the video and subscribe to my channel, you'd be very grateful. Now let's move on. The ice accumulations have been absolutely impressive and unfortunately devastating in many areas, exactly as we feared. And the snowfall totals in the primary snow zones have been remarkable. If you've been watching the radar, you may have noticed something interesting as this storm pushes into the eastern states. The dew points ahead of the storm are incredibly low right now. What that means in practical terms is that you might see precipitation showing up on radar before anything actually reaches the ground. The atmosphere is so dry that the falling snow or rain is evaporating before it can make it to the surface. The dew point needs to rise or the temperature needs to fall to meet it, and that usually happens as precipitation continues to fall and adds moisture to the air column. Sometimes it takes a heavier burst of precipitation to finally break through and start accumulating, so don't be fooled if you see returns on radar, but nothing falling outside your window. Give it time. As we push through Sunday, the rain, snow, and ice lines are going to be racing northward rapidly. Heavy snowfall is setting up across Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And as we move through the afternoon and evening hours, that heaviest snow is going to shift even further north, concentrating across New York and New England. This is where I expect the most impressive totals from this storm. Northern New Jersey and northeastern Pennsylvania are also going to be right in that bullseye zone where 2 ft of snow is absolutely on the table. Southern New England from Connecticut through Rhode Island and into Massachusetts is going to get absolutely buried. Now here's where things get really interesting. When we look beyond this current storm, we are going to be left with extremely cold temperatures for the entire week ahead. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the cold just doesn't quit. And as we push toward Thursday and Friday, it actually gets even colder. We're talking about temperatures running 25 to 35 degrees below normal across huge portions of the country. Some areas could see temperatures 40 degrees below where they should be for late January. That's the kind of anomaly that starts breaking records, especially when it persists for multiple days in a row. Sub-zero readings are going to become common across the northern tier states, and areas much further south are going to experience cold they rarely see. For context on just how extreme this is, the 1996 winter storm that older folks still talk about brought devastating ice and cold to many of these same areas. My understanding is that the freezing rain from that event is still remembered as one of the worst ice events in recent memory for parts of Virginia and the mid-Atlantic interior. This current pattern is drawing some comparisons to that historic setup, and the ice accumulations we're seeing in certain zones are approaching those legendary levels. Looking at the ice threat with this current storm, we're expecting severe freezing rain totals away from the immediate coastline. Interestingly, the coast itself stays relatively ice-free all the way up through the mid-Atlantic. Long Island is really the first coastal community that sees a significant ice threat. The marine influence from the ocean tends to prevent those really frigid surface temperatures that you need for freezing rain, even when there's a warm layer aloft melting snow into rain. Coastal areas get ice events sometimes, but it's much rarer compared to locations just 50 or 100 miles inland. The interior valleys and Piedmont regions are where the ice is absolutely devastating with this event. Some of those darker shaded zones on the ice accumulation maps are looking at 1-to-1 and 1-2 in of freezing rain. A few isolated spots could approach 2 in, which would be catastrophic. That level of ice accumulation causes damage that takes weeks or months to fully repair. For total snowfall from this current storm, here's how the regions break down. Areas seeing just a dusting to maybe an inch or two are mainly in the southern transition zones where precipitation types have been mixed, or where rain has fallen on top of earlier snow. The 2-6 in zone covers a broad swath of the mid-Atlantic and parts of the Ohio Valley. The 6-10 in zone pushes further north into central Pennsylvania, northern Ohio, and portions of Indiana. The 10-20 in zone covers much of New York State, northern Pennsylvania, and interior New England. And then we get into that jackpot zone of 20 and plus across parts of New York and New England, where crossing that 24 in threshold for a true twaft snowstorm is very much in play. But here's the thing. This current storm is just the beginning. The pattern we're locked into is incredibly supportive of additional large-scale winter events over the next 2 weeks. I've identified 4 legitimate threats that I'm watching closely, and I want to walk you through each of them. The first opportunity after this current storm passes comes midweek around Wednesday and Thursday. Now, I'm not counting this as one of my major 4 threats because it's not showing up as a large-scale system at this point, but there's a lot of moisture sitting offshore, and I wouldn't be surprised if something manages to come together for parts of the mid-Atlantic. If this does develop into something more organized, we'd probably be talking about 1-3 in for most areas, maybe pushing toward a moderate event if we saw dramatic changes in the setup. It's worth watching, but not worth getting too excited about yet. The first real legitimate threat comes next weekend. The models are showing moisture and a low-pressure system trying to develop along the jet ream. Now, the European model has been keeping this system way too far offshore for any significant impacts. We might see something trying to come together off the southeast coast, but with the jet ream positioned so far out over the Atlantic. This would be a very limited event affecting only immediate coastal areas, even if it trended 50 or 100 meters westward. The good news is that there's plenty of time for trends to occur, and this situation bears close watching. The GFS model has a much more interesting solution that brings more energy closer to the coast. The second major threat develops during the midweek period after next weekend. So we're talking about early February at this point. The models are showing a classic storm setup developing across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. This is the textbook origination zone for major nor-ears, and it looks remarkably similar to what we've been tracking with the current storm system. This one desperately wants to lift northward into the eastern states, but there's some warm air trying to work into the picture right as the storm gets going, which complicates things. The third and fourth threats come as we push toward that second weekend of February. We're now 300 plus hours out on the models, so everything has to be taken with a huge grain of salt. But we're seeing signals for an interior low-pressure system that could bring snowfall to inland areas, potentially with a secondary low developing along the coast that could get into the mix. New England would be favored if that coastal low tracks close enough, but it's so far out that we're treating it purely as a storm signal at this point. What I can tell you is that multiple opportunities are showing up consistently in the model runs, and when you have this much cold air in place, you simply cannot ignore these signals. Now let me explain why the pattern is so supportive of these repeated winter storm threats. The temperature setup over the next 2 weeks is absolutely frigid. As we get past this current weekend and into the midweek time frame, we're going to see those deep purple and magenta colors taking over the temperature anomaly maps. By Thursday, the 29th and Friday, the 30th, we're looking at temperatures running 25 to 40 degrees below normal across huge portions of the country. That translates to sub-zero readings across the northern tier and highly unusual cold pushing deep into the south. For some areas, we could be looking at record-breaking cold, especially given how many consecutive days we're expecting this pattern to persist. And here's the key point. Even by February 8th, we still have a solid Arctic air mass locked in place over the eastern two-thirds of the country. This is not a brief cold snap that comes and goes. This is an extended siege of winter that's going to dominate the pattern for at least the next 2 weeks and possibly longer. The mid-Atlantic from Washington, D.C. through Baltimore, Philadelphia, and into Northern Virginia and Maryland is going to be dealing with a complicated setup for each of these potential storms. You're right on that rain-snow line where small shifts in storm track make huge differences in what you receive. Some events might be big snow producers, others might start as snow and change to ice or rain. The uncertainty is higher, but the potential is definitely there for significant accumulations if things come together favorably. The Northeast from New York City through Boston and across interior New England is probably looking at the most reliable snow threat zone. You have the cold air locked in. You're positioned on the favorable side of most storm tracks, and when systems do develop, you tend to end up in the sweet spot for accumulation. Boston, in particular, could see enormous totals over the next few weeks if multiple systems verify. Hartford, Providence, Worcester, and interior locations across Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine are all primed for big snow. The Southeast from Atlanta through Charlotte, Raleigh, and into Virginia is going to be dealing primarily with ice threats rather than snow for most of these potential events. The cold air is there, but the positioning often puts you in that warm nose zone where precipitation falls as freezing rain rather than snow. Power outage concerns are going to remain elevated throughout this pattern. What makes this pattern so remarkable is the persistence. We're not talking about one storm and then a return to normal. We're talking about 2 weeks or more of relentless winter. The cold doesn't break. The storm threats keep coming. For areas that have already been hit hard by the current event, there may not be time to fully recover before the next system arrives.